Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful Sunday or whatever day you're listening and wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, thank you for your emails, your texts, is it post now on Blue Sky? Twitter's kind of dying. I'm grateful you all listen to the show, grateful you are sharing it with family and friends. If you're listening on Substack, please do hit that subscribe button so we can continue this advocacy. We've got a great show lined up today. Claudia Yoli Ferla is here. Claudia Yoli Ferla. She is the executive director of Move Texas, an amazing nonprofit out of Texas. We're going to be talking about immigrants, immigration, Trump's executive orders on immigration, his plan to build a detention facility in Guantanamo Bay. Also known as a concentration camp, to house undocumented immigrants. And Claudia will be here to talk about the work Move Texas is doing. And just as importantly, what you can do to be involved in protecting immigrants from this fascist takeover. It's going to get worse, guys. It's going to get a lot worse. And we need you active and involved. We need you engaged on every front. We need you to be allies to immigrants, especially to undocumented immigrants. And Claudia is going to share some ideas, very practical ideas. And I promise it's more than just vote harder. Like, it's practical stuff that you can do to be involved and to make an actual meaningful difference. Before we dive into that, before we bring Claudia on, I want to talk about government accountability and transparency. So shortly after being sworn in to the presidency, Trump issued full pardons to about the 1,575 duly convicted insurrectionists. These are white supremacists. These are guys wearing Auschwitz shirts, guys wearing Civil War shirts. Trump pardoned them. He said, "That's fine by me." We'll talk about that in a second, but the short version is, if you're pardoning Nazis for being Nazis and trying to overthrow the government, you're a Nazi. Now, he's gone a step further. He's ordered the Department of Justice to remove any mention of the insurrectionists, their names, the charges against them, the documents, the cases, the case status, everything from the DOJ website. So not only is he pardoning these modern-day brown shirts, he's saying, I am going to remove any mention in government files of the fact that you are a white supremacist and try to commit violent insurrection of the US government. This isn't just censorship. Right? Remember how Trump talked about government censorship? This is beyond government censorship. This is a deliberate effort to shield the violent insurrectionists from public scrutiny for their crimes against our country. It is to enable them to commit more crimes. It's to tell them that whatever violence you do, if you do it in my name, it's A-okay, and I will wave my magic presidential wand and I will pardon you. That's horrifying. Now, I've promised to do everything in my power as a human rights lawyer to uphold justice and to hold the Trump regime accountable. And so I submitted a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, to the Department of Justice, demanding that they re-release the names, the charges, the convictions, and sentences of the 1,575 white supremacist insurrectionists that Trump has pardoned. And the DOJ responded. I want to share what happened in that response. One of the other things I want to address is the fact that corporate media has been complicit and complacent in this. Because there's a deeper issue here of racism and white supremacy that corporate media is completely ignoring. White supremacists tried to overthrow our democracy, and they're not only being forgiven, but they're being protected by the president. They injured hundreds of police officers, at least 140 by official counts, and they enabled the death of several more. And meanwhile, media is refusing to address this grotesque racism and hypocrisy. For example, while these felons are being pardoned and protected, Black Americans are suffering up to 10 times higher arrest rate than white Americans for the exact same crimes. Latino Americans up to 6 to 7 times higher for the exact same crimes. They're suffering, Black and brown people, 20% longer prison sentences than white Americans for the exact same crimes. They're suffering lifelong bans and repercussions for nonviolent drug convictions, barriers to housing, barriers to employment, barriers to federal financial aid. You know the whole check the box thing? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? These white supremacists don't need to check that anymore. Black people convicted of a drug offense too, a nonviolent drug offense at that. Meanwhile, a guy like Robert Packer, a white guy who attacked the Capitol on January 6th wearing a Camp Auschwitz shirt, a sweatshirt that said Camp Auschwitz on it. This guy is pardoned, the Nazi, and he's pardoned. And the thing is, these are not part of an isolated act, as part of a broader agenda to protect white supremacy, to erase Black history. While Trump is wiping the DOJ website clean of information about the insurrectionists, guess what else he's doing? He's ordering the Air Force to stop mentions of the Tuskegee Airmen, the legendary Black pilots who heroically fought for democracy during World War II. Look, folks, the bottom line is pretty simple here. When a government protects white supremacists who sought to destroy democracy, especially while censoring the stories of Black heroes who fought to defend democracy, it ceases to be a government of the people. It becomes a tool of white supremacy. That is the identity Trump is embracing. And sadly, corporate media continues to fail. Now, meanwhile, much to my surprise, the DOJ responded to my FOIA request pretty quickly. And while unfortunately they did not yet fulfill my request, they didn't reject it either. In fact, they acknowledged receipt and they offered next steps. They stated the criminal division acknowledges receipt of your FOIA request, dated January 27th, 2025. The executive office for the U.S. attorneys is the United States Department of Justice component responsible for responding to FOIA privacy requests for information maintained by their offices. Hence, your request has been routed to the U.S. Attorney's Office for processing and a direct response to you. Look, in all transparency, given Trump's strategy to absolve himself of any kind of accountability, I expected an outright rejection. I did. But the fact that they forwarded my request to the U.S. Attorney's Office to fulfill my request is a huge step in the right direction. And fortunately, due to NPR and a few other outlets, I was actually able to download and preserve a makeshift list of the insurrectionists, their conviction date, their charges against them, and the status of their case. However, the documents were still missing. All the case file documents detailing what they did was still missing. Well, through one of my other contacts, who shall also remain nameless, I have found those documents. It's 6 gigabytes of files. I have it. I'll upload it soon, and you can check it out as well. And the thing is, it has photographs of the insurrectionists. I think this data is important for us to maintain because it is critical for us to know who these insurrectionists are. And put it into any other scenario. If there were 1,600 members of ISIS who had tried to overthrow the US government, would you want to know who they are? If there were 1,600 members of the KKK who tried to overthrow the US government, would you want to know who they are? Hell yeah, you would. And the thing is, even though we have the names of these insurrectionists, it is imperative that we continue to exercise our rights and continue to demand government accountability. It's why transparency and accountability matter. My FOIA is a lawful and valid FOIA. It's about exposing the truth and ensuring that the history that we've all witnessed cannot be rewritten by those in power. It's a fight to hold accountable those who undermine justice, no matter how desperately they try to hide their actions. And the Trump regime needs to comply. So I'll keep you up to date on what the response from the U.S. Attorney's Office is. But look, these past few weeks have provided a sobering glimpse into the depths of fascism that Donald Trump is willing to embrace to expand his autocratic power. His actions, from pardoning insurrectionists to erasing the records, to banning teaching about heroic Black soldiers, to raiding schools, to terrorize children with ICE raids, all this reveals an administration hell-bent on protecting white supremacy at the expense of democracy. You have my promise to continue to do everything in my power to counter these injustices. And as you can no doubt see, I cannot do this alone. I need and welcome your support. So if you are listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button, share this piece, share this audio podcast, and let's continue to do the work to amplify the call for accountability, because fascism thrives in the darkness. We have to bring it to the light and eliminate it. And we do that through dialogue, through education, through upholding justice and compassion. We do that by ensuring those who betray democracy with these violent insurrections actually face some level of accountability. When we come back from break, I'm excited to welcome our guest this week, an amazing young leader named Claudia Yoli Ferla, Executive Director of Move Texas. We'll be talking about immigration, immigrant rights, and what you can do to play a more meaningful role to protect the rights of immigrants in this country. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're on Substack, hit that subscribe button. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm grateful and fortunate to have our guest on today. Claudia Yoli Ferla is here. She's the Executive Director of Move Texas, a nonprofit that's working on building social, cultural, and political power in young people in Texas. Dedicated community organizer, born in Venezuela, immigrated at the age of 8, raised in El Paso and currently in Austin, a proud DACA recipient. She draws from her personal experiences to amplify young people, immigrants in Texas. And as we know, with the immigration debate, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, kicking into high gear, there's now an announcement that Trump wants to build a facility to house 30,000 undocumented immigrants in Cuba and Guantanamo Bay, which would also, in my view, be known as a concentration camp. I think it's important that we have the experts on here to talk. Claudia, grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. One of the biggest questions I'm getting is, what can us ordinary folks do? And if you're listening, I promise we're going to get to that because Claudia is one of the experts that's leading by example. But I would love, Claudia, for you to share a little bit more about you, your work. What is Move Texas, and what is some of the work that you folks are doing down there?
Once again, thank you for the invitation. My story really begins more than 20 years ago when my mother came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. And I remember, right, growing up in a community like El Paso, a border community that has been in the headlines, was in the headlines during the first Trump administration for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And it was really this community, right, that kept getting demonized at the national level, across headlines, that actually helped her to raise me. And it was in the community of other young people around me, as we were fighting for the protections of the DACA program way back when. So I'm aging myself. That we really, that I really learned about the power of organizing, where I learned the purpose, my own purpose and my own voice as an organizer. And so much, I think, of my story is really present in the mission of Move Texas, which is an organization that works to build the political power of young people in Texas. Because we know that as we fight for a democracy, right, we want to make sure that we're fighting for a democracy that includes all of us, regardless of our race, regardless of our age, regardless of where we live, and regardless of where we're born. And so in many ways, right, this fight for me is not just about policy and politics and a conversation about power. It's deeply personal, as it is for many young people who live in one of the largest, most diverse, and most engaged states in the nation, like Texas.
And that's such an important point, Claudia, because one of the main things that Trump and these right-wing MAGA fascists are doing is the dehumanization of immigrants, trying to turn it into a statistic that, oh, they're all rapists, they're all criminals, they're all here illegally, missing that none of that is true. Immigrants and undocumented immigrants have a lower crime rate than U.S. citizens and have always had a lower crime rate. You are statistically much safer. If your neighborhood is overrun by immigrants, it suddenly became a lot safer statistically. You are much safer walking down the street, and they'll take individual examples and use that to demonize it. So I think the work you're doing to humanize and to tell these personal stories. You talk about your mother coming with a suitcase and a dream. My father arrived with $30 in his pocket, and he tells a story, and I think to me what's most endearing about my father's story coming here with $30 in his pocket is he didn't realize how poor that actually was. He thought he had enough to get by, and he goes, the cab driver was like, "Are you insane? How are you going to survive off of $30? Like, what are you even thinking about doing?" And so the work you're doing is so critical for this. What are some of the projects that Move Texas is working on right now to engage the community and organize the community?
So Move Texas, as I said earlier, exists really with a mission to build a political power of young people in Texas. One thing you should know about my state is actually that we are the third youngest state in the nation. One out of every three eligible voters in our state is actually a young person. And so much of our
Can we,
work.
can we define can we define young, because that can vary based on who you're talking to. What does
So I'm
young mean?
out of the demographic, but we define young as under the age of 30. So one out of every three
Oh,
voters eligible voters
wow.
in Texas.
Okay, that is
Yes,
young. I stand corrected. Wow, that's great.
it's a very young, diverse, and engaged state, unlike again what you probably see in national headlines. And the work of Move Texas really focuses on three issue areas, right? The first one is civic engagement, making sure that we are building a democracy again that is not just building a democracy that reflects and includes all of us, right? And some of the ways in which we do that is ensuring that we're talking to young voters on the ground during critical elections and off during critical elections to ensure that they have the information, the resources, and tools in order to vote. One of the things, you should also know about my state is that it's a very deeply voter suppressed state.
Yes.
So our organization exists to really connect the dots for young people. We also focus on building the leadership development of young people. And so we have about over 20 chapters all across the state in critical communities. In fact, one of our most active chapters is actually in the community of Laredo, which is a border community also here in our state. And many of our members are also non-citizens, right? Because we understand deeply that this fight, the fight for an inclusive democracy, a multiracial, multi-generational democracy, again, is not just about those of us that can vote. It also includes people like me. And then the third way in which we impact change and build the political power of young people is actually through our issue advocacy work. We focus on issues that young people care about, such as gender justice, right? The freedom to choose if and when we want to have a family, access to our democracy, making sure that, again, every single day people can indeed participate in their democracy. And then, of course, climate change, because that is a top issue for many young people. All of these issues are also, right, very interconnected with the conversation we're having today on immigration. In Texas, we just started the Texas legislature a couple of weeks ago, which is unfortunately a body that has for decades, right, disenfranchised so many young people from the political process, and has, entrenched, right, this climate of fear that we're also seeing now at the national level, whether it be around healthcare access, public education, the conversation around immigration. And so we really exist to be, more than anything, a political home for these young people who want to make a difference. And I said, I'm so proud, right, that we also serve non-citizens alike, because again, this fight is about us too as well.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Claudia Yoli Ferla, Executive Director of Move Texas, a dynamic young leader in Texas working to, well, and I want to double down on this point you made, to counter the voter suppression that is Texas. I've always said that Texas is not a red state. It's a voter suppression state.
Correct.
And if it had voting access the way it was intended with the Voting Rights Act, it would have flipped blue and been blue throughout this entire time. I was doing some research on this, and since Shelby versus Holder, the decision to gut the Voting Rights Act in 2013, we have gone nationwide from about 210 polling locations to less than 100,000. More than half of our polling locations have been shut down, eliminated, removed. And guess what? And you probably know this, Claudia, the majority of them are in majority Black and brown neighborhoods, Black and Latino neighborhoods. It's designed to suppress the vote. Is to make sure that if you're white, you can walk down the street to your library and vote. If you're Black or Latino, you got to take 2 buses, 3 trains, and then hike across a desert to vote. It's ridiculous. And folks say, well, just because it's a little bit more difficult doesn't mean that it's voter suppression. Well, yeah, it does, first of all. But second of all, you don't need to suppress every vote. Some of these elections, 1%, 2%, 3%, that's all you need to suppress. It's just, skimming off the top to make sure you can maintain that majority. And it's kind of, relates to why we are in a place right now where Republicans have consistently, with the exception of this last presidential election, the last time they won the popular vote was more than 20 years ago in the presidential election, consistently lost the popular vote, but have maintained so much control. And what we're seeing with Trump and with this kind of MAGA fascist movement, attacks on immigrants, they've escalated. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What concerns are you getting from the broader community, from the immigrant community at Move Texas?
I want to actually take it a step back and expand a little bit more about that voter suppression before we deep
Please, by
dive
all
on
means,
your
yeah.
question on the concerns of immigrant communities, which I know is top of mind for so many people across the state and this country. But on expanding on the note of us, like as a state being a voter suppressed state, absolutely, right? We also have on top of gerrymandered districts, right, that
Yes.
eliminate voices or attempt to eliminate the voices of predominantly Black, brown, and young voters. We also have no access to online voter registration, which is a common sense solution to ensuring that somebody can indeed register to vote and participate in their democracy. There are many states across this country who have that. We also don't have same-day voter registration, meaning that in Texas, if you'd like to get to register, if you'd like to get registered to vote, you have to do so 30 days before, at least about 30 days before an election. Meaning that
Yeah.
if you miss this deadline and you are a U.S. citizen who is eligible to vote here in our state, you more than likely will not be able to be counted in that election process. Another thing that you talked a little bit about the polling locations. Another big thing big issue that we dealt with in this most recent election was the closure of many campus polling locations, which we know is a
Right.
place where young people are able to freely and securely access their democracy, and many faculty members too, right, that work in these institutions. And that is just like, again, on the surface level, right? The conversation when it comes to voter suppression. And so, yeah, of course, right? That means that in Texas, we are going to have representation that does not meet the actual moment, and that does not accurately reflect, right, every single day stories like myself, like so many of the stories and the membership of Move Texas. And so that means that we're walking into a Texas legislature here that will probably continue to not only disenfranchise our vote, but continue to target those most marginalized in our communities, from LGBTQ members to immigrants. I
Let
think,
me, I gotta add one more point to that because it's such an astute point. And I learned recently that Texas has like 13 or 14 languages that are commonly spoken. And
Mhm,
one of the largest demographics of mail-in ballots that are rejected are from Asian voters,
mhm.
South Asian, but South and East Asian voters, because ballots don't have access to South Asian and East Asian languages. And as a result, those for whom English is not their primary or strongest language will make some nominal error, and then the ballot will be rejected. And so it's just another form of voter suppression that oftentimes gets overlooked. And well, people will claim, well, that's not really voter suppression because everyone has access. Well, when they don't, they don't. And to ignore that is just to perpetuate that. But again, just wanted to add on to your point that voter suppression has many ugly faces, and it's critical that we attack all of them. And I think part of the strategy from the right is, this Senator Chris Murphy said this the other day, this blitzkrieg mentality, right? This lightning strike mentality that we're going to have just throw so much crap against the wall that you'll be so busy cleaning off every single aspect of it, you can't get all of it. And we just need a couple of those things to get through to be successful. But yeah, back to your point about the impact it's having on immigrant communities as well.
Yeah, and I think Texas is an immigrant state. It is home to so many immigrants. We are a mixed status state, right? Some of us are U.S. citizens. Some of us are here, like me, right, with the protections of DACA. Some of us have legal permanent residency. It is a mixed status state as well. Some of the concerns that we're hearing from young people on the ground, right, are naturally, and you've probably seen this not just in communities across Texas, but really in communities across the country, which are these immigrant rates, right, that are striking fear into communities, that are unjust, and they are an inhumane assault on people that are really just here seeking safety and opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? It's ridiculous to me that we are talking about raiding elementary schools, terrorizing children, that we are terrorizing people in their workplace, in hospitals, and even churches, right? And so the truth is, right, that we all know that Trump's mass deportation plans are not rational, that they're not good for the public as he is claiming, and or even based on sound policy. right? His plans have absolutely nothing to do with supporting the economy, with quote unquote getting rid of criminals, and or even helping working class communities, and or even, right, improving our country's immigration system. We know that this fight is so much more deeper than that. That his intent is to continue to stay in power, to ensure that he is essentially abusing that power to
Yeah.
normalize violence against immigrants like me. You know, other issues that we're seeing, we had also a recent anti-immigrant executive order by the Trump administration that, of course, has been is going to be litigated by countless of different plaintiffs around birthright citizenship, right? That directly violate the 14th Amendment, which is a cornerstone of our democracy that guarantees citizenship to all people born in this country. I can count, like, I have so many friends, so many family members, right, that um whose parents were not US citizens when they were born. And so it is ridiculous that we're having to have this conversation. It is ridiculous that we're having to essentially explain to everyday people that this is a right, again, granted through the Constitution. And regardless of immigration status, you have rights under the Constitution.
Right.
The Constitution does not exist just to protect a few, right? It exists to protect all of us who are living here in this country. And other things that we're hearing on the ground, right, are we had a very unfortunate DACA decision come out of the Fifth Circuit a few weeks ago with a very ambiguous decision that left so many of us thinking and wondering for a couple of hours, what is next, right? We had also the revocation of the extension of the temporary protected status program for Venezuelan people. I myself am also a TPS recipient. This impacts me personally. And I think it's, again, all rooted in ensuring, I think it's all rooted in ensuring that Trump sends a loud and clear message, right? That this is not a country for immigrants. But the message that I like to actually take back and say is that while he might be trying to quote unquote legislate away our power, they or legislate away our rights, right? They cannot legislate away our power.
Yeah.
We are literally vibrant parts of these communities. We are teachers, we are mothers, we are nurses, we are literally in every fabric of our society, and this is our home, and we are here to stay.
Your point about the birthright citizenship is such an astute point, Claudia. The 14th Amendment emphasized this specifically in the background. Obviously, this is post-Civil War, and I want listeners to understand how critical this amendment was, because you had a country that was established on this principle that all men are created equal. This, kind of a hypocritical claim, given that only wealthy white land-owning men had any power or say whatsoever. And even then, mostly Protestant, wealthy white land-owning men, right? If you're Catholic, you had other issues that you had to face too. And so it's a very specific group. And the story of America has always been, how do we expand that group to include more people? And every moment of struggle and strife has been, the in-group saying, nope, it applies only to us. We're not going to apply to anybody else. First, it was just wealthy white landowning men. Then it was just men in general. Then it was, well, women should have some say as well. Well, then it was this debate around these enslaved Africans that we brought here. Should they have rights? Should they have any say in the way this country functions? And then that's part of, I'm summarizing a lot, but the 3/5 clause came into play, that we'll count them for purposes of voting, but we're not going to actually give them any power whatsoever to vote. We're still going to continue to dehumanize them. And when you study the actual debates happening on the state legislatures, like in South Carolina, for example, Georgia, there were debates on, hey, should we force them into Christianity? And the answer was largely yes, we should. And then the question was, well, okay, if we enslaved them before, it's because they were Muslim or they were heathen or they were these tribal worshipers, but now they're Christian, so aren't they our brothers in Christ, and shouldn't we free them now? And the counter to that was, well, yes, technically they are our brothers in Christ, but they owe us. We saved them from bondage. We saved them from eternal damnation. And the least they can do is serve us in this life so that they can have salvation in the next life. And then after the Civil War, obviously the question was, do these folks have citizenship? And this was one of the main conclusions, that, yeah, if you were born here, you are a citizen with full and equal rights. Then we saw how the Jim Crow fiasco. But all that to preface that, if somehow this executive order is escalated and gets in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturns this principle, I don't know if the Constitution has any meaning anymore. I don't know if the words of the document have any meaning anymore. If we can just have a Supreme Court decision say, you know what, we changed our mind. The last 150 years of jurisprudence on this don't matter. In fact, you don't actually have any rights as a person born in the United States. I think, and Claudia, I'd love your opinion on this, but I think it would undermine the entire point of a functioning democracy at that point.
You know, I wonder if we're at the moment where we are a democracy already in name only. And I want to take us back to Project 2025, because there was a lot of conversation during the last election cycle around Project 2025. Some people, you know, sounding the alarm bells around this is the plan, right? If Trump and his cronies get elected into office. And then there was also folks on the other side of the aisle, right? Also discussing and talking about the fact that, at least claiming, right, that Project 2025 was not their policy blueprint, which we all knew this. I mean, if the last week alone hasn't been enough evidence that yes, Project 2025 has always been the plan, has always been the policy footprint of the Trump administration, then you're truly and genuinely living under a rock. But I want to take us back because some of the, you know, policies in Project 2025 outline this, right? A change in the or a different or a more conservative view of the Constitution. A more conservative definition of the Constitution, packing the judicial system, right, with MAGA loyalists, as well as not only his administration, but people in key departments in this country, eliminating departments. And I think to me, the list goes on and on and on and on. But for somebody like me, who comes from literally a country that has seen the demise of democracy over the last 3 decades with the Maduro regime, Chavismo, right, all leading to the Maduro regime, it is very triggering to see this happen in now this country that I call my home. And I say this because these are things that verbatim, step by step, also happened in my country. We're changing the Constitution. We're changing the way we run elections. We are ensuring that we're packing, you know, all of these different institutions that are supposed to check the balances and power of a president with loyalists. And it is very deeply concerning. And if you are somebody who is connected to what's happening currently in Venezuela, we do not have free and fair elections. I think the most recent July elections show that, right? And if you are somebody who is, you know, connected to the fight there and the issue there, and you know, right, that Venezuela back in the 70s used to have one of the strongest economies in the Western world, and now is one of the, you know, one of the most, is suffering one of the most inflation points, probably in the entire world. You should be concerned. Like, you should see Venezuela, the story of Venezuela, of how an authoritarian leader rises to power and an authoritarian government rises to power and stays in power, as a cautionary tale of what could happen in this country. The thing that you all have to understand, that we all have to understand, is that we all contribute to this democracy, but democracy is also a very fragile thing, right? It cannot be a democracy in name only. And so when we're talking about voter disenfranchisement, when we're talking about, again, a Congress, right, that refuses, because of partisan gridlock, to move forward on the issues, to ensure that they're focusing on the issues that the everyday person in this country has elected them to focus on. All of those things, right, are all ways in which our democracy is already failing us.
Just joining us, we are having a brilliant conversation with Claudia Yoli Ferla, who's the executive director of Move Texas. And, you know, Claudia, everything you said is it's painful music, but it's truth. I mean, I call it painful because it's hard to see your country capitulate to fascism. And, you know, both of us are immigrants. In my birth country of Pakistan, it was founded on the principles of a democratic republic, protecting minority rights, separation of religion and state, and unfortunately it's capitulated to right-wing religious extremism, very similar to what we're seeing with Project 2025 and the rise of Christian nationalism. And so for me, it's kind of a deja vu, and it's painful to see, but it's truth, and we have to call it out for what it is. We're down to like the last 6-7 minutes before we wrap up. I want to talk about the number one question I get from folks is, with all that's happening right now with the ICE raids targeting schools, I'm getting calls from teachers, from ESL teachers, from business owners. What should we be doing? What can the average person be doing? And the way the question is always framed to me is, I'm on a fixed income, or I'm just a student, I don't really have much money, or I'm a single parent, I'm super busy. for the folks who have the passion and the heart, but may not have the resources that others do, and then obviously for those who have the resources, what are two or three practical action items that folks can take that can actually move the ball forward? And then the question is always prefaced with, don't tell me to vote harder next time. Like, I've already voted, I'm done. Like, I can't just rely only on that. There's got to be something else we can do. So what's the advice you give folks on how they can play a more meaningful role in protecting our democracy, protecting our republic from this fascist takeover?
Thank you so much for this question. Because yes, I think the answer could be vote, but again, we will not have another presidential election for another 4 years.
Yeah, if it ever
So
comes.
we're living with this reality for the next 4 years, at least in this country. And so wanting to remind folks, right, that voting is just one tool in your toolbox, in your much larger toolbox for how you can impact change. I think the best advice I can give to somebody right now is that no matter, do one little activisty thing a day, one little thing, activisty thing a day, whether it be something small or something big, goes a long way. I want to start by first saying to our immigrant communities, it is important, if you're listening, right, to know that you are not alone, that there are organizations like Move Texas and leaders across states like Texas and across the country that are standing with you, that are organizing year round to ensure that by the time the next election comes, our voices are represented and heard. But in the meantime, while that happens, right, we're fighting for your rights and ensuring that your voices are heard in every step of the way. It is important for y'all to know that you have rights under the Constitution, right? No matter your immigration status. If you are in a situation where you do have an officer, an ICE officer, a Border Patrol officer approach you, the most important thing that you can do is to remain calm, to understand that you have the right to remain silent, and that you have the right to seek counsel and legal representation. To all Texans and to all people in this country, right? You have to recognize that the conversation we're having right now, and this fight is not just about immigrant communities, right? It's about who we are in our core value as a state and as a nation. And so it is our opportunity to reject policies that are rooted in fear and division, and standing together for a future where all people, regardless of their immigration status, can be treated with dignity and respect. And so I have a couple of different ways in which you can plug in and do something. Number one, you all know and love an immigrant, that we are a nation based on immigrants, right? And so your duty right now is to weaponize the privilege that you have as a citizen in this country, to ensuring that you are raising your voice, that you're calling your representatives, that you are getting involved with local organizations that are in the front lines of fighting for immigrant communities. Donate to organizations like Move Texas. Let's say you don't have time, but you have maybe some extra dollars to spare. Donate to organizations like Move Texas that are doing this work year round, because it matters. And every single dollar allows us to continue serving our communities in the way that we can serve our communities. Also get involved with a local immigrant rights organization, right? Get involved with immigration clinics, get involved with organizations that are providing direct service to immigrant communities in the moment. And again, the most important thing that you can do right now is to weaponize that privilege, have those tough conversations with your loved ones and your family members that maybe did support Project 2025 and the policy footprint of Project 2025, and try to understand and change their minds and change their hearts, right? And let them understand that immigrant communities, again, are here. They're vibrant parts of our society, and every single one of us knows and loves an immigrant. And I think that, the ask right now, if you are in elected office in Congress, move forward on finally passing a comprehensive immigration reform that does not come at the expense of border militarization, of more funding for institutions like ICE and CBP, but rather, right, create a pathway to citizenship without having to separate families. I think, sadly, we're above and beyond the point where we're having a conversation about comprehensive immigration reform. Try to find a way to build a compassionate immigration reform in this country.
That's so well said, Claudia. And what the part that I always get so flabbergasted by is, you've probably seen the debate from I want to say the 1980 presidential election between Ronald Reagan and George Bush. And in that debate, of a young voter, he looks probably under 30, asks about immigration reform. And Reagan and Bush present their answers each trying to outdo each other on who can be more compassionate to immigrants. It's really remarkable. I mean, you would think that these were left-wing liberal commies, by the way, the way they'd be described today. Reagan talks about, he goes, maybe we should have an open border and that we have economic opportunities to go back and forth. And Bush talks about how there's a Mexican in my family. And I mean, he said it in a very, kind of a white savior kind of way, which is a little bit odd, but he tried to humanize Latinos, which I appreciated despite his awkward way of doing so. And I just don't understand how we went from there to where even Democrats, like Joe Biden, will run for president, condemning Trump on his asylum ban, and then as president, enact almost the exact same asylum ban. It's mind-boggling to me. It's maddening to me to watch Democrats sprint to the right to try to appease Republican voters, not realizing that the vast majority of Americans don't want cruelty. They want compassion, and they want leaders who will have the courage to lead with compassion. It's just enraging to me to watch them capitulate. Claudia, it's been such a privilege to have this conversation. We hope to have you back on soon. Before you go, can you share how folks can find you on social media, how they can connect with you, and how they can donate and support Move Texas?
Absolutely. Look us up. We have a website, movetexas.org, and we're also on most social media mainstream platforms. If you are an Instagram user, that's probably our most active social media. We are move_Texas.
Claudia Yoli Ferla, Executive Director of Move Texas, a nonprofit organization working on building social, cultural, and political power of young people in Texas. And certainly her advocacy resonates nationwide. A privilege to have you. We're going to have you back on soon. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I will be right back after this short break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That, my friends, was the Executive Director of Move Texas, Claudia Yoli Ferla, an amazing leader, somebody I highly recommend you support. Check them out at movetexas.org. Support their work, donate to them, give them all your support because they are doing the Lord's work. As we close out, I want to talk about this fascist funding freeze. You like that? The triple F that Donald Trump is trying to enact. And this is really horrifying. This is the blitzkrieg moment that Senator Chris Murphy was talking about. First thing I thought of when I heard about this freeze was that this is going to kill people. It is going to kill people. You deny people health care, you kill them. In my home state of Illinois, Governor Pritzker confirmed that the Trump's funding freeze had completely shut out Illinois from Medicaid. That's 4 million Illinoisans who rely on Medicaid. And by the way, it was not just Illinois. Every Medicaid portal in all 50 states reported that it was down. And it's critical that we document what happened because they're already trying to rewrite the narrative to say, well, we never did that. It was just the media lying. No, it actually happened. We know it happened. It's documented, and you can't lie about it because we know it happened. And so I want to talk about really quickly just documenting what happened, the lawsuits that are there, and what we can do to get involved. On Monday, the Trump regime sent out a memo that they're freezing spending on the $3 trillion of congressional appropriated funds. This is last Monday. And as a result, by Tuesday, Medicaid portals crashed nationwide. Millions of low-income Americans were at risk of losing access to life-saving health care overnight. Keep in mind that Medicaid covers 41% of all births in the United States, 41%. And the so-called pro-life party that constantly screams about declining birth rates, that constantly screams about the need for more babies, but won't fund universal health care, won't fund pre-K, and won't fund child tax credit, and won't fund school libraries, and now is eliminating health care needed for 2 out of every 5 babies born every single day. Again, this will kill people. The freeze resulted in a threat to the Section 8 housing assistance program. I grew up on Section 8. People rely on this to have a roof over their head. And this program risked putting millions of people out on the street. And that would have created another host of issues that we can't even get into right now. Head Start and university grants are being thrown into chaos. Professors and low-income children and students could lose access to direct and critical education programs. Food prices are higher. By the way, all this was about egg prices, apparently. Egg prices are up 30% since Trump got elected. This is what happens when a fascist comes to power and attempts to seize more power that doesn't belong to him. Now, Trump claims that this is about ensuring that money is not being wasted on DEI initiatives. First of all, that's racist, but it's also a blatant lie. This is an extension of his authoritarian fascist Project 2025 agenda, a plan designed to dismantle diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and ultimately defund any federal programs that help vulnerable and marginalized Americans. It's a cruel, cruel policy that Trump's engaging in. And the White House finally issued a statement saying, hey, we never intended to freeze Medicaid or Medicare. This is fake news. And the deflection, guys, is just disgusting. It's bad enough that you committed this fascist act, but then the deflection, just at least own it. It's a reminder that raising your voice matters, because it was the outrage that they saw in response to this reckless behavior that made them realize, oh, this was a bad idea. And that's why raising your voice matters. Be outraged, make sure they hear your voice. Because if Trump is allowed to continue unchecked, it will get worse. And, a quick message to the MAGA voters cheering Trump on. Do y'all realize that this funding freeze is going to disproportionately harm you the most? The largest demographic of Americans who rely on federal welfare benefits are Trump supporters. The people relying on the welfare benefits that Trump is trying to freeze are Trump supporters. 9 of the top 10 states that rely on federal welfare are Republican states. 9 of the top 10. This MAGA racist obsession with the myth of Black and brown people abusing welfare is coming full circle. Dying of whiteness, as Professor Jonathan Messer declares in his book, is real. That's what this is. So who's fighting back against this fascism? Well, one, a coalition of nonprofits, the National Council of Nonprofits and several organizations already filed a lawsuit, and they sued the Office of Management and Budget and its acting director, Matthew Vaith, seeking an emergency temporary restraining order. A federal district judge, Lauren Ali Khan, issued a TRO, temporary restraining order, but that expires February 3rd at 5 p.m., which is why, fortunately, there are 23 attorneys general, 22 states in DC, who are also filing a lawsuit that unilaterally blocking this aid is unlawful. Congress has already authorized this aid. They control the purse strings, not the president, and you're blocking it. And we're suing you as a result of it. Remarkably, 0 attorneys general from Republican states are signing on to this lawsuit. 0. The Democrats are fighting for everybody. 0 Republicans are signing on to this. And the thing is, if your AG is not signing on to this lawsuit, they're telling you they value loyalty to Trump more than accountability to you. They value being in Trump's graces more than they value actually protecting you and making sure you can get the healthcare and the food you need to live. But it's definitely not a cult that these folks are in. If you go to my Substack, I wrote about this and included a link to contact your attorney general. And the thing is, if your attorney general has signed on, call them and say, thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Attorney General. Thank you for supporting this lawsuit. And if they have not, call them and say, what is wrong with you? You better sign on to this thing right now, or we'll make sure you get voted out next election. Because look, the bottom line is this. Trump has already signaled that this budget freeze is just the beginning. If he gets his way, fully gutting Medicaid is on the agenda. Fully gutting Section 8 housing is on the agenda. Getting rid of SNAP and Social Security, all on the agenda. So if you're angry, good. Channel that anger into action and do it this week. Contact your AG, thank them if they're doing it right, and call them out if they're doing it wrong. Get active in your local community and make your voice heard. And guys, we know this matters. This works. The local immigration hotline that I set up, the snitch hotline that I set up so that people can snitch on their neighbors, definitely nothing Nazi about that. That hotline had to be shut down because they were getting so many fake complaints. People were calling and saying, there's a billionaire who owns Twitter who was an undocumented immigrant. Go arrest him. And so they finally shut it down. And that only happened because of a mass movement of people making phone calls. So contact your AG, let them know what's happening, let them know the issues at hand, and ensure that they are accountable to this. Because otherwise, They are not going to act unless we push them to act. Whew. All right, my friends, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow me on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You have my commitment to continue to advance the show that builds on compassion, builds on justice, builds on accountability for those in power. We've got a great show lined up next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place at 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. My friends, be fierce. Lead with compassion and justice. God knows we need more compassion and justice in this world at this time, and continue speaking truth to power. Till next week, peace.